Okay. I think people are just now starting to come in. Good. Welcome, everyone. We're just going through the admission process, so bear with us a minute or so whilst we let everyone into the meeting. Okay. Excellent. And I think we have started recording as well, Patrick. So I think we're on and we're live. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this British Marine webinar on the recently released ICOMIA report, Pathways to Propulsion, Decarbonisation for the Recreational Marine Industry. My name's Ross Wommel. I'm from British Marine, and tonight I'm joined by Patrick Hemp, who's the technical consultant for ICOMIA, who commissioned and released the report. Patrick, thanks for joining us this evening.
Thanks, Ross. Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks. Okay. So what are we doing here? So basically, what we've decided to try and do is hopefully you will all have seen the release, either being present last week at METS or through the communications that have come out through various ways and means over the last week or so. But tonight really is just the first opportunity to show you a little bit more detail about the report. I'm sure hopefully most of you have now received a copy of the synopsis, the high-level overview, which is available to all. And what we're going to do is we're going to just delve deeper into the report to try and understand how the synopsis results, the conclusions were achieved, and some of the specific detail that is within the full report and how it was achieved. I'm going to cover the majority of the presentation, but Patrick is here to help me answer some tricky questions if they came up. If you want to ask a question, you can either wait till the end to the Q&A, or if you'd prefer, you can pop a question in the Q&A, the text box, which hopefully you'll see on the screen, and then we'll deal with it as and when we get to the end. It's entirely up to you. So welcome. So first of all, I think it's really important to explain. So we've got a bit of a mixture of attendees today, not only from the UK, but certainly I've seen attendance from really people across the world, which is great to have you join us. So thank you for joining us. And I really, predominantly, the first thing is just to really explain who ICOMIA are. For those who may not be in the day-to-day workings of marine industry associations and the work that goes on behind the scenes, it's a really good opportunity to explain to you who they are. So ICOMIA are the International Council of Marine Industry Associations, a global organization representing all the different marine industry associations from around the world. They advocate globally, work with international authorities, be that the IMO, be that trade bodies such as ourselves, but also trade areas such as the EU. They publish documents and guidelines. They try and fill gaps or fill understanding of gaps between the different rules around the world, and they produce tools to support all of the different marine industries around the world work and engage with each other. ICOMIA are the people I go to when one of my members at British Marine phones me up and asks me how to export to Japan or the US. I go to ICOMIA, I ask them, or I use the contacts that I've met through ICOMIA. So they bring all the different marine industries together, and they have members including us, the NMMA, the French, the Spanish, Australian, members from Hong Kong, Japan. There's a real selection of countries. Any country which really has a recreational marine industry will be a member of ICOMIA. So this is where we go and we talk and we discuss how we can make boating easier, simpler across the world, and how we can support each of our industries to sell into neighbouring countries' trade partners. So that's ICOMIA. So let's actually have a real introduction into this report. So, I suppose the first question is, why do we need it? So, certainly over the last 4, 5, 6 years, there's been a lot of discussion in regard to climate change. And we're now really at the position where there is no reasonable argument against recognizing that there are risks. Yep, so there are risks. Whichever way it came about, there are risks associated with climate change. And for us as a marine industry, we need to really understand those risks and figure out how we can mitigate them. How can we work to ensure that as an industry, we are able to continue to work, to trade, to provide those experiences to our customers. And as part of that, we need to look at how we can transition to a carbon neutral future. As the UK body, British Marine has a responsibility to support our members on this transition to net zero. So governments around the world have identified that they have an objective. They are putting different things into law in regard to emissions, and our job is to help our industry through that. And it's the same for the other MIAs around the world, I'm sure. So we're all looking at how we can support our members adapt to the changing business conditions that we'll be working in. The aim of this study was to really bring some data to the fore. Yeah. A lot of the decisions, a lot of the discussions we've been having over the past however many years have been based around conjecture, estimations. Yeah, what we haven't really ever had is some exact data on what each of these things are. Yeah, and we need that data in order to guide the strategic decisions and technology choices that we as an industry need to make, yeah, to achieve that greenhouse gas reduction. As I said, decarbonisation is a government priority. Things are changing. They're changing fairly quickly in some countries, a bit slower in others, but they will continue to do so. And we need the right information and data to make sure that the direction the governments take, be it the UK government, European Commission, or other governments around the world, are the most suitable for our industry. And we need to give you the data as companies within our industry to make the right business decisions. So that's why the work was done. So let's have a look at the approach to how it was done. So for those of you that have read the synopsis, hopefully you'll recognize this diagram. The approach has really been around the fact that we need to look at decarbonisation in our sector as more than just tailpipe emissions. It's just what comes out of the exhaust. We need to look at it from a whole life point of view. The products that we manufacture, products we make, they last a lifetime, literally a lifetime. And as such, we need to ensure that when we look at the risks and the emissions and the impact of those emissions, we need to have a whole life view. And full life cycle assessment is deemed really the only suitable method of understanding that real impact, the environmental impact of our products. So the working group that was brought together to look at this report sat down, and they really had a look at what were the most suitable different types of system that will be made available for our sector over the next 5, 10, 15 years. And we specifically looked at 9 craft categories. There's, of course, lots of discussions about, is it the right power systems? I think the power systems that were chosen were the appropriate ones at the time, and they give us the best idea, specifically around the smaller craft, because this report is only under 24-meter area, for what possible solutions we may have. And then we have the 9 craft categories, and it's a global view. It's a global report with a global view. And so as such, the craft category is really based on volume and usage around the world. Yes, there are a couple of, I would say, smaller sectors which may not have been represented. However, this is a really good overview of the majority of those types of vessels within the pleasure sector. Okay, so 5 power systems and 9 craft categories. So what was the next step? we needed to look at the approach. So primarily, we had to look at an overview of each of the propulsion systems, carry out an LCA, a life cycle assessment of manufacture, use, and end of life for the energy converters and energy carriers. The total cost of ownership was an important part. We are marine industry, and we need to supply our customers with good, solid, reasonably priced products. So making sure that we maintained our ability to have a market was a really important part of this analysis. You have the implications of different power systems, so life expectancy, maintenance, performance, and then, of course, the infrastructure implications. It's all well and good having a type of propulsion, but how do we make sure we have the supply of fuel to those products? And then finally, those were all brought together and in effect ranked, which is the most suitable propulsion system with all of the different decisions that we've had to make along the way, and which is the best one for each of the different types of vessel. So let's look in a little bit more detail. So first of all, the systems analysis. Each of the different systems is really broken down into component parts. Here you can just see two examples. One for the hydrogen internal combustion engine propulsion system, and the other one for a pure battery. So we broke down the systems in order to be able to then have that comparison. What was the carbon footprint of each of the component parts that goes into each of the different types of system? Once we broke those systems down, we then had to look at displacements. How does that affect vessel size, vessel weights? In effect, trying to understand what would work in a boat and what wouldn't work in order to be able to separate out those systems which are obviously not going to be viable in the long term. Based upon that, we then had to look at how are boats used. Now, there's been a lot of talk over the last couple of years in regard to low profiles, how much engines are really used. We have a general estimation within the leisure industry and within the charter industry of how much we think boats are used. But as part of this, we had to really go out and talk to manufacturers, talk to boat users to understand what is traditional, typical type of day, of week that these different types of boats were used to ensure that, given the restrictive parameters of the different boat uses, different propulsion systems, how would we be able to actually realistically use some of the alternative systems which are being proposed? And here you can just really see an indication of that framework that was developed. So an inflatable boat tender at the top, propulsion's around 20 kilowatts, fuel tank 70 litres. Yeah, we're looking at an average engine hour use per annum of 35 hours over a lifespan of around 10 years. Now, there are always going to be differences of opinion, variations in those usage, but we had to come to a single figure, a reasonable, verifiable, checkable, auditable figure. And so these are the figures that were discussed within the group, but also outside of the group with other stakeholders, as how we could try and estimate on a life cycle basis what the impact of boat usage would be. So these are the basis of the life cycle assessment. And then, of course, we really did have a very good look at what this meant for boats. So I have stolen this. I have stolen a few of these pictures from the main report, so I hope I'm not going to get in trouble from ICOMIA, but that's I think part of what we're doing here is to really look at a little bit more depth. So the realistic operational changes, here's a day cruiser example. So on the left, you see the baseline internal combustion engine. Lots of acronyms today, so please bear with me. The traditional current range is around 14 hours worth of use and about 166 nautical miles. Yeah, so that's on the left in the grey. If you then start to look at alternatives, we start to actually understand if we are trying to have the same range within alternative types of system, because of the energy held within the different fuel types, all of a sudden your fuel tanks and your systems get larger, get heavier. So you can really see in the blue, if you replaced the typical gasoline or e-gasoline internal combustion engine with a internal combustion hydrogen system, trying to achieve the same range, you'd be looking at a 430% larger system size and a mass of 350% larger. Vessel displacement being 56% heavier. Replacing it with a pure battery, maintaining that range. Sorry, I'm just going to move the slide on. There we go. There we go. Would give you a volume of 360% larger, a mass 820% larger, phenomenal increase in weight, and a vessel displacement 133% heavier. So from this, you can understand why we had to make some assumptions in regard to modifying the operational abilities for some of the alternative propulsion systems which are being considered. Specifically in regard to this, the reduced range went down to 3 hours. Yep, so a typical day, it was decided, would take about 3 hours of cruising time with a nautical miles maximum of 35. So, as you can see, reducing that down to 3 hours and 35 nautical miles with a hydrogen ice system gives you a volume which is still 61% larger, still 13% heavier, and a 6% heavier vessel displacement. But you know, that is as best as it can be achieved with that alternative system. Pure battery gives us a 23% smaller volume in total, however, an 81% greater mass and a 16% heavier vessel displacement. So these were all considerations, and this was done across the board. So all 5 different propulsion systems with all 9 different vessels. Okay, this is just one example of the work that went on to give us really an idea of what requirements will be made or be needed in order to ensure that these systems were viable systems and were able to achieve, if not an equivalent range and operational set of requirements, but at least an achievable one, and one which would be usable. Okay, we then moved into the life cycle assessment part. So for the life cycle assessment, the LCAs were carried out on the basis of structure and systems. Boats vary. We had to have a constant. So it was really I would say, a minimal life cycle assessment based upon the structural components of the vessel, what was needed for a vessel to be the vessel, and the propulsion systems only. So we looked at the manufacturing, the operational emissions in use based upon the previous, maintenance and end of life. And this was all done to an international standard, ISO 14067, the carbon footprint of products. And again, this was carried out across the board. This is where we start to get to some interesting data. So I think the first thing to say with this slide, this is an LCA comparison, and it's not a comparison between types of vessel. Okay, it's a comparison on a boat basis. So don't move across the board. Focus on the comparisons within each vessel type. That is the equivalencies. We're certainly not saying a high performance motor yacht has got less raw material LCA than, for example, a sailing yacht. It may do, may not. But these comparisons should be kept within. And from this, you can really start to see where the life cycle emissions are for the different types of vessel with different types of propulsion system. So just having a quick look here. When you look across the board, the hull structure is consistent. However, the raw materials of propulsion, you see variances between the different types of system which has been proposed for vessel types. You then have the manufacturing cost, the transport, energy. WTT is energy well to wake. Well to tank, WTT. So that is the cost of really creating the energy, the environmental cost of creating the energy to the point where it enters into the tank. You then have the energy tank to wake, which is using the vessel. You have your maintenance and you have your end of life. So it really starts to give us a clear indication of, first of all, how much of an LCA is within the structure of a vessel. So not complete, it's just the structure, not the full LCA of a vessel, but how much is in use, how much is in energy production. It's a really good comparative amount. The second slide in this area that I just really wanted to touch base with was in regard to the variables. So this is a comparison of the propulsion system only, LCA, relative to the traditional baseline under highest and lowest potential global warming potential scenarios. The really important thing to understand is, at the moment we are in a specific position in regard to things like energy production. So when you are manufacturing, you are using energy. That energy has a global warming potential, which is different from country to country, and actually can be different time to time. But what does the future hold? And as we were as this study was being carried out, I think there was a need to understand what that long-term transition will be. What is that long-term transition? Is hydrogen going to be more environmentally produced in 2035 than it is today? And I think very, very possibly. So this really shows the variance that will occur as we transition to more environmentally friendly energy production, both for manufacturing, but also for energy production. And that variance can make some really big changes. And certainly if you look at the light and the dark, it can significantly bring down some of the life cycle assessment of the full life cycle, carbon life cycle totals, based upon how our energy is produced in the country of manufacture and the country of fuel manufacture. Really important part to understand. It certainly goes towards some of the arguments the MIAs will be making with government in regard to ensuring energy generation is decarbonised as we go through this decarbonisation process. Costs, another really important part. So, double jump. So once we understand the environmental impacts, we also must look at the financial costs, and a full total cost of ownership analysis was carried out on all the different variables that have been discussed as part of the LCA. So for each system, your capital expenditure, be it energy storage, any energy conversion, and additional systems was covered, along with the operational expenditure, energy carrier costs and maintenance costs. And the modelling really was based upon, as I mentioned, that transition of energy moving forward. Where are we today? So today it was last year when this was started, 2022 mix, different mixes of energy creation to create hydrogen, create electricity that add towards the total, and what that will look like in the future. What does the 2035 mix look like? But we also, or what was also carried out by the study, was the zero fossil fuel mix. What is the numbers if we purely have zero emission energy provided? So looking here now at the capex costs, this is again one example. And you've got to remember, I'm just really going a very high level above. The study goes into detail in regard to each of the 9 vessel types and 5 propulsion methods. So a high level capex breakdown for displacement motorboats. Here you can see if we wanted to go to hydrogen today, last year, 2022, you'd be looking at a 600% increase in the costs on a displacement motorboat. So that's how much the difference is in trying to put in these new alternative systems based upon today's prices. However, as we know, as market uptake increases, then those prices will start to come down, and for example, a hydrogen fuel cell system on a displacement motorboat will be 146% in 2035. All of this is estimated, of course. That is the estimated cost. OPEX is very similar. So again, looking at the OPEX breakdown for a displacement motorboat in 2035, you start to look at, how much it is going to cost in the future in comparison to today's prices of running. So a traditional current diesel motorboat, we have the OPEX there, and comparatively in the future, it's likely that a battery and hydrogen storage system with that requirement to replace parts over the life of a vessel is starting to look at around, in Europe, 220% increase in costs. So it's a really important part of understanding of what this is going to cost, because we need to ensure that our customers, we retain our customers. Yeah, we can provide the right type of product at the right price for them. Here is just a slide showing you the OPEX and CAPEX combined total cost of ownership. This is the EU basis for 2035. So again, you can start to see the real increases with the different types of vessel. So OPEX and CAPEX were looked at. We also had to throw in some other real assessments. It's not solely about environmental impact or costs. The ease of implementation needs to be looked at, performance implications. The level, so CRL and TRL, the technology readiness level. So actually, where is this technology in regard to being able to be rolled out? Is it something that could be used today, or actually have we got 5, 10, 15 years before this type of technology is going to be mass usable? You've got the long-term storage of both fuels and the vessels themselves, life expectancy, other auxiliary demands, and of course safety. So all of this was also put into the mix on trying to understand the most appropriate system for each type of vessel. Infrastructure, really big, important part of this transition. There's a lot of detail, a lot of work went into understanding what and how are we going to be able to provide the infrastructure to support the different propulsion systems. Life expectancy of assets was taken into consideration, along with safety and the availability of fuels and energy carriers. So here's just really a couple of pictures to understand the sort of work that went in and the sort of results that have come out within the full report. And really the conclusions, from the infrastructure is to really understand the fact that this transition is going to be extremely tricky and may well be very expensive. Most marinas have lower voltage electricity at the moment, say most in certain countries, but higher voltage will be needed. It can be grid sourced or on-site produced. The on-site storage could be used to support local grid at peak times. So in effect, putting energy back into the local system from vessels, offsetting some of the costs. Hydrogen as a future fuel, has existing transport processes, but how do we store it on site? Is it through tankage or new pipelines? Whereas HVO, of course, can be supplied and stored as per existing fuels. Although if we want to offer both in the transition, then there's a doubling of the cost for storage with a secondary system needing to be installed. So all of this information was put together. Went through a suitability and ranking process, and here you can kind of see how it was ranked. All the various attributes that I've mentioned, so the LCA, the total cost of ownership, whereabouts the commercial readiness level or the technology readiness level is, and this was where it was really graded and given an identifier to understand how suitable these different systems were, with all of the above attributes that have been analysed in detail. And here is just really an example. So it kind of shows us the higher numbers, the better. So this is how we got to the final numbers, how we got to the final details. Total score and rank of power, high performance motor yachts, US and EU, as you can see there. It's not to say you need to really look back, and the LCA at the top, HVO, that's got 0 in it. But that's really based upon the ranking system. It's not saying that there is 0 effect. It's saying that from a ranking position, the effect is greater than 20%, less than or equal to 20% increase in global warming potential. So that's why it's at the zero, not that it's exactly the same, to give us the really final totals. And then there was a zero fossil fuel scenario. So as I mentioned, when we looked at the ratios, what does the future hold? Is energy going to be produced using nuclear, still using oil, using gas, or is it going to be purely net zero emission? So this is a zero emission scenario, which gives us a different total based upon the ranking system. And from this, you can really see the detail of trying to identify which system is going to be the most suitable based upon all the variables that were deemed necessary as part of the analysis. So up at the top, this is a US and EU representative scenario. Up at the top, inland waterways, we can see diesel is the most suitable, regardless of the fact that it's strange to consider it. Yes, the way that it's the analysis has come out is that there will be a small increase in global warming potential. However, with all the variables, it's still the most suitable for that type of vessel being used in the way that it has been described. It goes through the same. In some of the analysis, because that's a solid bar, that shows a slight global warming increase. When it's stripy, it's a global warming potential decrease. So for PWCs, you can see there battery electric comes in first, and there is a reduction. So even in the first one, there is a reduction in the global warming potential in the use. I think PWCs are based upon a commercial use for this table rather than the minimal use. So that really is how we got to, or how the report got to the conclusions that it has. And then the sort of data that comes out, this is just one example, gasoline really comparing an e-gasoline against a battery electric for 4 different vessels. We can see that, the global warming potential on e-gasoline is a reduction in emissions, whereas with battery electric, in the way that it's used, there's actually a small increase in global warming potential when using battery electric for that type of vessel with that type of usage operating. You've got the total cost of ownership there, the reduction in range, and the availability of fuel, along with the commercial readiness level. And that's done for each of the variables between the 4. So I've talked for 30 odd minutes. And I think now it's just really good to identify the conclusions. I think from this report, certainly what I've taken, and these conclusions are from the report, and I've thrown a couple of my own in as well from what I've taken from it. Alternative fuels require a change in vessel range and power and consumer behavior and expectations. We are going to need, in the same way that automobiles and electric automobiles particularly have had a lower range, but have really tried to explain that just because it's a lower range, the majority of use of the vessel of the vehicle is within the range. We're going to have to explain that with certain types of propulsion, the ranges are going to be different. People are going to have to engage with their vessels in a different way. Some things are going to be possible, and I think we have to work on ensuring we have the right systems for the right types of operational requirement. Electric propulsion is a solution. Electric propulsion works. Low utilization makes embodied emissions a significant percentage of LCA totals because of the usage profiles. The energy that goes into manufacturing these products is a very large percentage comparatively with other products in the final totals. So as such, we need to keep an eye on retrofitting to make sure that we are decarbonising the existing fleet, not just new products, but also the manufacturing side. Low carbon fuels will play a significant part in our solution. Definitely part of the pathway, the transition, and very probably a large part of the final solution. And certainly the message that British Marine's giving to government is that a market-based approach must be taken. We don't want to see certain types of fuel ring-fenced to certain types of sectors. There must be a market-based approach. Fuel decarbonisation is a primary influencer of emissions in the manufacturing of vessels and fuels, so we have to encourage government to support the transition of energy production to a more zero emission basis. All alternatives will increase total cost of ownership, even with the market scaling, and that's something we really need to be aware of, something we will have to work on over the next 5, 10, 15 years. And we really need to support these changes with ensuring we have those protocols and standards there for the industry to use. And certainly the work that ICOMIA, myself at British Marine, other marine industry associations is doing with international standards behind the scenes, making sure that we're trying to have the standards ready for implementation as and when it's necessary. I know, Patrick, we've been working recently on the shore powering, high voltage shore power standards that we're developing at the moment. So these things are going on whilst this work is happening, and whilst we are talking, we're also trying to create those standards and engaging with government to make sure government is aware of where we are. And finally, I think this is only carbon. A really important part of my conversations with government has been around local air emission quality. We must remember that this study is around global warming potential, carbon emissions. However, local air pollution and water pollution restrictions are going to play a big part in future design requirements as well. So what's up next? Sector-specific consumer detailed guidance, I believe, is coming out through ICOMIA over the next few months, probably early next year, to really focus on some of the detail. And behind the scenes, ICOMIA, British Marine, other marine industry associations are working on the next stages, the next steps along the way to provide the foundations for what the industry will need in the future. So with life cycle assessment, EBI have started looking at a recognised LCA footprinting framework. That's something which is certainly going to have input from ICOMIA and hopefully ourselves into the development of it. And the standardisation work that's going on, as I mentioned, the safe installation standards we need to create for all of these alternatives so that they are there and safe and usable for the systems. Patrick, thank you for joining. I've spoken a lot. Is there anything else that you would like to add to before we get on to some of the questions that have come in?
Yeah, so maybe just quickly, I'll give just having a look at the chat and some of the questions that are coming through. And essentially, these results, we have to bear in mind, they are not related to on-road transport. So the hours are so low, we average 35 to 48 hours across the board. Some, as Ross has pointed out, the personal watercraft was modeled on a rental sort of commercial application. So the hours were higher there. And I think the high performance motor yacht was also about 130 hours on that. But that combined with the long service life is really what impacts. We're making boats last too long and we're not using them enough, is essentially why the embedded carbon on the end of life calculations is quite negative. So we, part of the study was also trying to work out how the best way to achieve an LCA analysis was. So you only really learn by doing. And we learned a lot in this. A lot of the data, we did have to make some assumptions, but the data that we got from not just craft manufacturers and propulsion systems guys, but also mariners and the like, in terms of the infrastructure. The data was very good. But we really do, if you then model it on a sort of shared boat owners, so if you took for example, the fishing boat, and you gave it 10 owners instead of the single owner, the results would change quite dramatically. So perhaps we are looking at consumer changes. The other aspect, just to mention on the sustainable marine fuels, one of the reasons we used Ricardo was really this behind the scenes data that's needed. So Ross has highlighted the 2022 profile. There was a 2035 profile, and then there was a zero carbon energy mix, and that was for US and Europe. Europe did quite a bit better than US on the energy mix in 2035, which is interesting. But ultimately there, the power of Ricardo's, they've done a lot of other studies with IMO. They've also done these well to wake, or more well to tank, actually. So just analyzing the sustainable marine fuel themselves independently of any propulsion systems. So that's another variable, and obviously the results there can change dramatically on your feedstock. So on the initial sort of calculations, they were using HVO was the sustainable marine fuel as a diesel drop-in replacement. And that certainly, depending on the feedstock of HVO, impacted quite heavily. So if you're taking it from palm oil, which has quite a negative land usage value to it, it's not so good. And then if you take it from waste product itself, and then just further on that was really the subject of the current fleet, which is so important. So our engagements with the Commission, those of you that are familiar with the RCD, effectively 80% of the craft that are operating today, so 2023, are actually following the limits set out in the first RCD. So call it pre-2014, so 10-year gap. So we're really playing catch up, and anything we do now today, if we had a brand new RCD today, even 10 years time, only 20% of the fleet would be matching those emission limits. So some of the logic behind sustainable marine fuels is that it can be dropped in. There's, the engine manufacturers have confirmed that 99.9% of engines out there can accommodate. It's not like the sort of stage one biofuels, which had a lot of problems. So in order to decarbonize the current fleet, it came across as quite a good option as well. Yeah.
Thank you. So having a quick look through some of the questions. We've got one in regard to end of life, I suppose. It looks like end of life was quite small on the motor yacht, or non-existent. Was that because the lifespan that we have? But I suppose it's a difficult question, because from a life cycle point of view, I would say there are very few vessels over 40 foot which have been manufactured in GRP, which are actually reaching their end of life naturally, outside of an incident, accident, or they kind of keep going, don't they? So I suppose it must have been very hard to try and understand what the long life cycle would be, given the non-availability of data at the moment.
Exactly. So I think on that question, there was an end of life for all craft types. The graph is quite difficult to read. So some of the crafts had a sort of brighter color right at the top, and it's a bit difficult to decipher between end of life and maintenance colors there. But on the high performance motor yacht, you're right, Ross. It's really that 50-hour 50-year lifespan that impacted that, and we're seeing that on the large yacht side as well. Very few of them have come to the end of the life, the bigger ones.
Yeah, and there is a question, about steel canal boats. I mean, that's a very UK thing, I think, or maybe Northern Europe thing. We certainly we aim to have an inland watercraft, and the inland watercraft that we picked was one which is utilised and operated on various continents. Actually, it's one which is used in the US, Canada, France, and the UK from a major inland hire company. So that was why. But yes, no, we don't have any steel canal boats, unfortunately. Okay, just having a look at any other questions. There's a question on the assumptions in regard to battery life, replacement cycles, and battery electric maintenance costs. So Patrick, do you want to
Yeah,
cover that? Yeah.
that's a super important question, and I think it's one we are going to face as more people read this report. Because I'm not a battery expert by any means, but they can be measured in rechargeable cycles, or they can be measured in years. And part of the challenge there, I think, Ricardo, if I remember correctly, I think they used a 12 or a 15-year battery cycle. Now, I think we all know, looking at the media, every second month there seems to be a new technology type or investment made, and quite a big, a lot of attention. We know Toyota's been working on that for a while, just in terms of solid state batteries and next battery technology. So Ricardo, there was a sensitivity analysis included in the report. They were well aware that something may come, but at the time we had to take 2022 effectively as the year. So unless you were making commercially available in large numbers, and not just testing on a bed, unfortunately they didn't, they weren't able to analyze some of these new technologies. But certainly that is one avenue where things may improve, and we've seen that from lithium ion to lithium iron phosphates and the like. There's a bit of safety concerns that have been reduced slightly. Those of you who attended METS will also be aware of an actual demonstration of a screwdriver being put through a solid state cell and still working. But really, yeah, I can see there's going to be huge leaps and bounds in that space, which may change the numbers, but effectively you're still probably going to have to replace that battery every 12 or 15 years, regardless of your usage. So that would obviously negatively impact. If you had a vessel that was a 35-year lifetime vessel, you'd be replacing the battery 3 times. Yeah.
Just having a quick look through the questions. There's a lot of talk about HVO and the limitations on HVO, specifically in regard to land usage, and the fact that actually, I think understandably there is not going to be as much HVO as we all need or we all would like. But at the moment, certainly the take up in a short-term transition, whilst there is stock, would certainly help the long-term strategy in regard to utilization of this as an alternative fuel and emissions reductions in the short term. We're aiming for 2050, but unless we start reducing, we're going to have even bigger annual cuts on that pathway. So really important to not put it off. And certainly something which I often say with government is, not putting off better, waiting for the best. And actually, we need to start making these changes on the pathway, even if we haven't quite yet got to an understanding of what that long-term final answer may well be.
And just quickly to highlight, Ross, because this was a challenge for Ricardo, where the obvious state is you look at, and really we have an availability challenge for all fuel types, not just, I agree on the sustainable marine fuels, but certainly hydrogen and even electricity. And one of the factors we tend to forget about is that if the on-road sector are going to electrify, then the capabilities of those producing fossil fuels now will switch probably to making sustainable fuels. You're never quite sure. So, and in the same way, the electrical supply will need to, the infrastructure for on-road recharging will need to be seriously very well developed. So you've got these imbalances as other sectors. If the on-road sector go heavily electrified only, we could see potential challenges on the grid infrastructure, the electrical grid infrastructure, and therefore mariners may need to become more self-sufficient, i.e., generate their own source of power.
Yeah, well, thank you. So Patrick, just asking, what's the next stages? I mentioned that we're going to be looking at there being some more sector-specific support guidance information coming out probably later on this year or early in next year. But what do you feel is the kind of the next stages for ICOMIA in regard to the report, what's come out, and what we do with this information?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I think you summarized it really well there. We've already, pre-Metstrade, we've approached a few governments. We've been in touch with the European Commission. It's a bit of knowledge. It's just information sharing at the moment. But the report this size takes a while to digest. I think one thing it highlighted was really the need for not just on the propulsion side, but the entire craft. So cradle to grave life cycle analysis is really good, and you don't need to compare. You can operate it in a yard. You can have 2023's model boat plugged in and just make tiny incremental changes to the way you do things, and potentially come out with quite a big global warming potential difference in those different models. So certainly life cycle analysis is important. We also don't need 15 different types of life cycle analysis tools. We need to try and keep the apples versus apples comparison. Otherwise, there could be challenges there. But also, it's not just on the greenhouse gas themselves. I think we need to have an honest look at how we manufacture, and not just batteries. I think it's all appliances and components on vessels. But yeah, we've got a lot of work to do, and just digesting this. I think it'll be early next year where we'll have a bit more information available. And we started a sort of live Q&A type of document, which the marine engine manufacturers have contributed to, and the like, which has become quite a big sort of document as a knowledge sharing tool. Marinas are stuck in the middle because it's a supply and demand. How much money do they need to invest? How many actual fast chargers are needed in a marina? One of my personal favorites, and this isn't included in the report, but these new what they call vehicle to grid, and now it's vessel to grid or vessel to anything technology. So on a marina side, this would be taking advantage of all those boats with panels or with wind vane generation, and allowing them, so it's bi-directional charging effectively. So if you have a marina, if you think about it, from Monday to Friday, there's not a whole lot of traffic. And then suddenly on Saturday, Sunday, your high-powered chargers are going to be working overtime. So we need to try and work out, how to sort of soften that curve so that we're not all using our boats at the same time. And it gives the marina a chance to sort of, I guess, try and stagger their fuel supply, whether it's electricity or the supply of hydrogen and the like. It will help.
Yeah. It's, interestingly enough, the government in the UK is just at the moment consulting upon future energy laws, supply laws, and part of that is simplification for the ability for individuals to input into the grid. So in effect, they're trying to make sure that the law is fit for this vehicle to grid, vessel to grid future. So at the moment there are consultations going on in the UK. So certainly, if anyone from the UK wants to comment on those consultations, it's out at the moment. Thank you, Patrick. Just having a quick look. So vessel to grid model. So that's something that I think is kind of being discussed at the moment, and the ability for the systems to. So I suppose I'm going to kind of wrap it up now. First, thank you, Patrick, for joining us. I thank you for all the hard work I know that went into the creation of this, the hard work and money that went into the creation of this study. If you want to get a copy of the synopsis report, that's available to all. Patrick, there's an ICOMIA website, isn't there?
Yeah, so I think someone dropped it into the chat there. So propellingourfuture.com is the website to go to. That'll give you that synopsis summary Ross is talking about. And then it's also sort of housed on ICOMIA.com as well, in both fields. And then
Brilliant.
yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. And then if you're a BM member of a certain level, a certain grade, you get you can get a full free copy of the report if you're Enterprise or Enterprise Plus by emailing technical@British Marine. Classic and Classic Plus can purchase a copy for $4.99 and $9.99 respectively. For those who are Access members, you can upgrade, or ICOMIA is selling them direct to non-members or Enterprise members, and the cost is €2,450, which I believe you can book through the website. If you're not UK-based, please talk to your Marine Industry Association about how to get a copy. All right, well, thank you all, and thank you, Patrick. And yeah, I look forward to the next stages, and I'm sure this is something we will be talking about, well, at least until 2050. So yeah. All right. Well, thank you all, and take care. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Thanks, Ross.